a student of mine sent me an article from the New York Times about Hanukkah. It really bothered me.
Why?
I'll tell you why. It's a Jewish fellow, I don't even know if he's Jewish, but he said he's from a mixed marriage, assimilated Jew, who does Hanukkah for one reason, because he doesn't want Santa to win. He says he has a little daughter, and he can't have a tree, so he has to have a Hanukkah Menorah. So he says, I started to research, what exactly am I celebrating? What did he find out? That he's celebrating that there were a group of, these are his words, fundamentalists who lived in the hills. And then in the cities you had what word he uses? The Hellenists, the secular Jews who were against Bris Milah, against this, that, and the other. And the end of the story is that the Maccabees won. And he tells how he went and he bought a bunch of books, then he contacted a bunch of rabbis, then he bought a books more. He said, wait a minute, I'm one of the Hellenists. The Maccabees would have hated me. So why am I celebrating Chanukah? Wait, so then he says, but Santa can't win. So I have to put aside all my contradictions and I'm going to do Chanukah. This is the article.
Oh my goodness.
Now there's a very basic piece of misinformation. And it's not misinformation, it's disinformation. In other words, I don't think he's making a mistake. I think he's deliberately misrepresenting the facts. He presents it as a disagreement between Jew and Jew. Between the Maccabees and the Misyavnim. And then on the bottom he has a footnote. P.S. I made a mistake. It wasn't the Romans, it was the Syrian Greeks. He has a very fancy word. No, but the P.S. is reflecting a detail which is not in the article. In the article he makes no mentions of the Romans. In the article he says that it was a fight between Jew and Jew. In other words, he gets all entangled. The fact that he's entangled is because he's saying to himself, wait a minute, why am I so... He writes that in traditional times, Hanukkah was one of those holidays no one made a big deal out of. But today that so many Jews are assimilated, so the only issue is that you can't bring the tree into your house. So Hanukkah became a major Yom Tov. This is his presentation of Hanukkah. This is his posit. This is his argument. This is his position. I read it. I'm going to take this to Beis Rivka. I'm going to read it to my students, the seminary Aleph girls. I want to hear them respond to this. Anyway, now what would the Rebbe say to this kind of an article? First of all, bottom line is he's lighting the Menorah. He's lighting the Menorah. It's in Licht. He's lighting the Menorah. Second of all, this serious, like I said, I don't think it's misinformation. I think it's disinformation. To make it sound like it was a Jew-on-Jew issue. It was Jew-on-Jew. Don't misunderstand. But the Misyavnim were in that position because of the Goyish... it wasn't only an influence, it was a coercion. Right, I told this to you yesterday, that when Bayis Sheni was built, very shortly after the building, when Bayis Sheni was built, it was sanctioned by Malchus Paras, right, by the Persians. 40 years later, Alexander of Macedonia conquered the world. Paras was gone. He conquered Persia, took over the entire Persian Empire. And the world became Greek, which is Hellenist, right? So the Persians were Evdei Avodah Zarah. I talked about this yesterday. The Persians were Evdei Avodah Zarah. The Greeks really were also Evdei Avodah Zarah, but they were Hellenists, and they didn't really believe it. They were secular. This was the transition from a world to a world. Please, if you have, thank you. And I want to add also, and again, I told this to you yesterday, if you know the Chazal about Shimon HaTzadik, it's a very, very important Maimon Chazal, Gemara, right? What does the Gemara say? That Shimon HaTzadik davened for Alexander's success. Shimon HaTzadik went into battle every time Alexander Smugdin went into battle. I told this to you yesterday, right? That Alexander Smugdin came to Eretz Yisrael. In the Goyish history books, there's no record of it. But there's an undeniable fact that he went to Eretz Yisrael because he was in Phoenicia, he was in Tyre, he was in Lebanon, he was north of Eretz Yisrael, and he was in Egypt, and he went along the coast. He had to pass by Eretz Yisrael. But there's no record in the history of Bechal. His history was written 100 years after he died. It wasn't written during his lifetime. There's no record of what happened in Eretz Yisrael. The only thing that's a fact is he came in Yisrael, there was a Beis HaMikdash. He left Yisrael, there was still a Beis HaMikdash. And he did not make the Jewish people become Hellenists. It's nicht gemisht. Right? So this is the way the history is told. In the Goyish world, you would never know he passed Eretz Yisrael. And if he did, they talk about other peoples, not about the Yidden, not about the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara says that Shimon HaTzadik came out to greet him, and he got off his horse and he bowed to him. And his generals told him, since when does a God bow to a man? And he said, every time I go into battle, he goes into battle with me.
Whoa, yeah.
It's a Gemara. Now, why is this so important, in my assessment, in my opinion? Because Alexander of Macedonia, I say this from time to time, I really believe this. Alexander of Macedonia changed the entire world. Alexander of Macedonia, from a secular historic point of view, is the most successful person in the entire history of the world. No man changed the face of the earth as much and as permanent as Alexander the Great. It's not even close. The people who tried, right? Hitler tried, Napoleon tried, Genghis Khan tried. They were warlords, the people who thought that they're going to conquer the whole world and remake the world in their own image, but they failed. He succeeded. We're Hellenists to this day. The secular world can be traced directly back to Alexander the Great. It's not complicated. Now wait, when you qualify that by this Gemara, you come away with a very interesting impression. Shimon HaTzadik was the Nasi Yisrael, Gadol Yisrael, who made a historic decision. What was the historic decision? The Jews were under the Persians. Right? The Persians were good to the Jews. So why is he davening for Alexander to be victorious? Why? Because the Persians were Avodah Zarah. And the world was succumbing to the pressure of Avodah Zarah. They couldn't win. They couldn't. Avodah Zarah, right? There's Chazal say that there's a Gemara that Menashe Melech Yisrael came to Rav in a dream to help him with a Shaila in Hilchas Brachas.
Who came to who?
Menashe Melech Yisrael. He was a king in Yehuda. Yehuda was a big Rasha. He was the son of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. He killed Yeshaya HaNavi. He was Eivid Avodah Zarah. He was a very big Rasha. The Mishnah says he has no chelik in El Mabor. And he came to Rav to help him with a Shaila in Hilchas Brachas. Rav had a Shaila. Rav was one of the greatest Amirayim. So Rav says to him, if you know so much Torah, how could you be such a big Rasha? If you know so much Torah, how could you be an Eivid Avodah Zarah? So Menashe says to him, had you been in my times, you would have raised up the tail of your skirt and run ahead of me and Baba Antagechke. In other words, Avodah Zarah was predominant. This is also a Gemara. The Gemara says that Anshkan Sagadela took away the temptation from idol worship. The Gemara says, I talked about this all yesterday, that the Gemara says that they took away the temptation from idol worship because it was too strong. Right? I told you the verse from Alter Rebbe, that they put it into guilt. Alter Rebbe said that they put it into guilt, and I'm not sure it was worth it. Anyway, the point is, what I'm trying to bring out is, if you go into this Gemara a little more deeply, what happened was, there was an ancient world, which was a Avodah Zarah world. Alexander represented a new world, which is a secular world. What's a secular world? No God at all. And Shimon HaTzadik preferred that to Avodah Zarah. Alexander was successful because Shimon HaTzadik decided that his derech is preferred to the derech of the Persians. The Persians were good to the Jews. They were good to the Jews. So why is he davening against the Persians? The only hasbara you could give was because the Persians were Avodah Zarah. I mean, there's a Fedish Gemara, there's an explicit Gemara that says that the Anshkan Sagadela, Shimon HaTzadik was from the last of the Anshkan Sagadela, davened and removed the temptation of idol worship from the world. So I decided, this is me now speaking, don't take this that seriously, it's not like I read this in a sefer, that this is a connection, there's a link between these stories. The Anshkan Sagadela davening for Avodah Zarah to go away from the world, and Shimon HaTzadik davening that Alexander of Macedonia should win, they're sequel to each other. They're sequential, because that Avodah Zarah he replaced it with what the Greeks represented. The Greek culture dominates the world to this day. It's what they call a secular culture.
So you're saying that the person that's most responsible for changing the world is Alexander the Great?
There's no question about that. I don't think anybody who studied history...
HaTzadik is responsible for making Alexander the Great.
That's right. That's right.
So really,
that's right.
HaTzadik is the one who changed the world.
Precisely. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly my point.
That's fascinating.
And there's Maimorei Chazal to support it. Right? There's a Maimorei Chazal to support it. So Shimon HaTzadik decided they were better off with no God than with many gods. That's basically the decision. It's a very interesting idea if you think about it. And it's a controversial idea. It's nish poshet. It's nish poshet, right? The Alter Rebbe says, I'm not sure it's worth it.
Yes.
He says, very interesting. It's an interesting version of history. If what I'm suggesting has any credibility, it's a very interesting version of history, right? So now the Syrian Greeks come into the soul. Huh?
It actually makes sense to some extent. Because when you have multitude, you don't necessarily feel a lack of God, but when you have no God, you feel a void and you seek after one God.
But we can argue about it. The Alter Rebbe said, I'm not sure it was worth it. But the Alter Rebbe is saying, the word is, tzadikim have a moidunika koyach. That's the word. What happens in the world has to do with tzadikim. And it's not just a tzadikim. A tzadik made a choice. A gadol b'Yisrael made a decision which would affect the Jewish people and affect the whole world going forward thousands of years into the future. It's a fascinating... And of course, if Shimon HaTzadik, if what I'm saying is true, that Shimon HaTzadik made a judgment call. You know, it's like the story of Alter Rebbe and his friends. Should Napoleon win or lose? Right. It's a judgment call with an enormous amount of achrayus. It's not just, I want this guy to win because I want my plumbing not to get turned off. It's the future of the Klal Yisrael, future of the Jewish people, of the world. Shimon HaTzadik makes a decision. Yeah. So what happens subsequent? The Alexander dies very, very quickly, and his generals take over his reign. They divide it up into parts, and Israel remains in the sphere and the influence of the Ptolemaic kings of Egypt. Right? The Egyptian Greeks. They're all Greeks. The Egyptians are Greeks. The Syrians are Greeks. The Romans are Greeks. They're Hellenists. Right? They still have 1,000 gods, by the way. They just don't take them seriously. I mean, the Greeks were all left Avodah Zarah. I mean, read the history of Greece is full of Avodah Zarah, but it was different. Their culture was not. In other words, they didn't mamish worship. If you came to them with another god, they just put him on the list. They had no problems. You know, you know how Alexander conquered the world. Every place he came to, he didn't change them into him. He changed himself into them.
What does that mean?
He married women from every culture. He adapted customs from every single place. He was an incredible politician. Besides being a great warrior, he was an incredible politician. He won people over. He made people want to be a part of his empire. And it worked. It worked. Anyway, the point of this is, for the first 200 years, the Jewish people were under the influence of Egypt, and they left Israel alone. Then the Syrians became dominant over the Egyptians, which is the eastern. It's all Greece. It's all Yavon. It's all Golos Yavon. It's all Hellenism. It's all secular. Okay, but it's different. It's different armies. It's different kings. It's different power plays. Different politicians. But the culture is the same. So for 200 years we were under the influence of Alexandria, of Mitzrayim, and there's a lot of history and a lot of tzaddis. Yidden suffered plenty under the Egyptians. You know, the Targum Shivim happened in Egypt. The Chazal say there was a basic Knesset in Alexandria that was so big that they would shake a flag to know when you should say Amen. All those Jews, man, woman, and child, were wiped out. So they killed them all. The Egyptians. So it wasn't like nobody was particularly loving of us. Yeah. Then the Syrian Greeks took over Israel, and they decided they have to change us. That's the story of Hanukkah. And they came into Eretz Yisrael, and they forced Hellenism upon us. A segment of Jewish people became Hellenists. So this guy, this New York Times writer, is presenting it as a Jew-on-Jew conflict. He's saying, wait a minute, I'm learning Chanukah licht. I'm the enemy. I'm the vanquished. I'm the one who lost. You understand? Aber zint de meneer von deswegen. He's lighting the meneer anyway. Why? He's lying to Meneda because this is his words. Santa can't win. This is what he says. It's so interesting. I have two seminary groups. The seminary group that's a little bit more worldly. I'm gonna read them this article, and I want to hear. It's my plan. I want to hear how they're going to respond to it. Yeah, but what is our answer to it? What is Hasidus' answer to it? What is the Rebbe's answer to it? The Rebbe's answer to it and the Hasidus' answer to it is, and forget all the points he makes. One of the things he says is that Hanukkah was an excuse-me holiday. He went and consulted some Reform rabbis, obviously. He says he had some books, then he spoke to some rabbis, he bought some more books. And they all told him, Hanukkah used to be an excuse-me holiday. Now it's a very big deal because of Santa, yeah? How would Chassidus say this? Chassidus say the following. Chanukah is a Yom Tov that talks to the Yiddish Nefesh. And when Yidden are more Yiddish, so there's so many different flavors to the Yiddishkeit. When there's nothing left of Yiddishkeit except the Yiddish Nefesh, the only thing that remains is Chanukah. It's not about Santa. It's about a Jew having a Jewish identity. He can't say that. He can't admit that to himself. He's not allowed to. He's a writer for the New York Times. Yeah, but this is what's happening. When there's nothing left, there's only Chanukah. I said to my students yesterday, by Sifka, I said, what is the most likely mitzvah for Jews all over the world to keep? And again, we can argue about it. I'm not arguing about it. I'm saying whatever I think because I'm the teacher. I think the most frequently practiced mitzvah is bris milah. If you think about it, it makes the least sense. It should be the first mitzvah that Allah halten bris milah. Why? Because it's so deep in the neshama of a Yid, you gotta do it. You may hate it, you may be against it, you may want to change the laws, but a Yid macht a bris. But 99.9% of the Yiddish boys have a bris. Seriously. And they want a kosher moil, they want to bring an Orthodox moil in many cases. What's the second most likely thing we do to keep? I think it's a close competition between Chanukah and Pesach. I'm talking out loud. You disagree? Tell me. A close Chanukah Pesach. You could make the case that besides the bris milah, most likely mitzvah Yidden to keep is Chanukah, and they'll tell you it's because of the tree. In other words, if Chanukah was in the middle of the summer, they wouldn't be keeping it. But because it coincides with the Goyish Chag. In other words, there's a social explanation for
you're
it.
Right.
There's a secular explanation. There's a chitzoniistic explanation. But the Rebbe would certainly give you the argument that it's because Chanukah touches that point in a Yid. It's the last thing you give up. You give up this, you have no Jew. Because it talks to the Yetzam and the Shama. It talks to the idea. We learned the Maimer last week Friday, and then we repeated it again this past Friday. We finished the Maimer. I've been thinking about that Maimer because they gave it out. Lahak gave it the Maimer. They reissued the Maimer. They rewrote it and reissued it. And they made it much shorter. The version we learned was quite verbose. They made it much shorter, much more condensed. But all the points are there. One of the key nekudas of the Maimer we learned 2 weeks ago, Friday, was that any time a Goy attacks a Jew, it's religious. Doesn't matter what he says. Any time a Goy attacks a Yid, attacking, if you have Friday, I gave the Shin 770, Inyan Ayadas. A Goy is always attacking Yiddishkeit because the word Jew is religious. There's no such thing as an irreligious phenomenon of Jewhood. Now, of course, I know how silly what I'm saying is to the majority of the Jewish people on this planet. 9 out of 10 Jews are not Shemitei Mitzvah, Rahman al-Islam. Right? And they prescribe, they feel more in common. I don't know how they would feel about this guy's article in the New York Times. But they're certainly bechitzonius, more like him than like us. Right? And Chanukah emanated a light in very, very high numbers. Right? What would be Chassidus explanation? Why? Because they're Jews. In other words, a Jew could be not frum, but he's still a Jew. And the definition of Jew is that he's representing the Eibishter in this earth. And when a Jew loses that, he stops existing. He stops existing. In other words, a secular Jew is incredibly religious. You know how religious he is? He doesn't do anything, but he wants to identify as a Jew. I told this to you the other day. I saw Facebook. I'm not a Facebook frequenter. I'm really not. But I know I have so many other things to be busy with, but I came across Facebook because someone sent me a message on my whatever. And I came across Facebook. A guy said, I love the Jewish religion, the best religion in the world. I'm an atheist and I'm still a Jew. Now, why is that significant? Because when a man says, I'm an atheist and I'm still a Jew, you have to ask him, why do you care? And the answer is, you care because you're so deeply religious. Without any religion, you're a religious person. It's a dir negea. If you live in Brooklyn and you keep Shabbos and kosher and Thomas, you're a goy, I understand why you get upset. Why does it bother you? You're an atheist. Why is it important for you to be identified as a Jew if the word has no meaning? And the answer is because it has enormous meaning. It has enormous meaning. So that's a different spin on the Hanukkah story. It's a different spin on the Hanukkah story. Anyways, I saw this article. Of course, it got me very upset. The part that got most of it was Pashat. He doesn't tell the history correctly. He makes it a fight between a Jew and a Jew. And it wasn't. Between a Jew and a Gentile, who forced a segment of the Jewish people to become Hellenists, and then it became a conflict between Jew and a Jew. But the basis for it were the Yevonim, not the Misyavnim.